I have always been invisible. Not in the literal sense, people could see me, sure, but in the way that truly matters. The kind of invisibility that sinks into your skin, wraps around your bones, and follows you into every room where people talk right through you as if you do not exist. That has been my life for as long as I can remember. I am Emily Carter. The daughter no one notices. The sister who might as well be a shadow. In my family, there has always been only one star. My younger brother, Jacob. The athlete. The prodigy. The boy who could do no wrong. If he breathed, my mother cheered. If he blinked, my father clapped. Every conversation in our house somehow revolved around him, his grades, his soccer matches, his future. And me? I was just there. I remember once coming home with a report card filled with good grades. Not perfect, not extraordinary, but good. I held it out with the smallest flicker of hope. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. "That's fine," he muttered. My mother barely spared me a glance. "Good. Now, Jacob, have you decided between Stanford and Yale?" That was the soundtrack of my life. Jacob's name, over and over. His successes. His plans. His dreams. Not mine. Today was his high school graduation. Another event where I would be nothing more than a body taking up space in the back row of my own family. As I sat there in the crowded auditorium of Lincoln High School, I could hear my mother's voice spilling over with excitement, bragging to anyone who would listen. "Jacob's got offers from everywhere," she gushed. "Stanford, Yale, of course, he has not decided yet. He has too many options." My father nodded proudly. "That boy's going places." No doubt. I sat at the edge of our row, hands folded tightly in my lap, eyes fixed on the stage like I was watching a play I had seen 1,000 times before. I knew my role: stay quiet, stay small, disappear. And yet, something felt wrong. No, not wrong. Different. Like a pressure building in the air, thick and heavy, but no one else seemed to notice. Not my mother, who was still talking as if her voice alone could fill every inch of space. Not my father, who was grinning like he had just won the lottery. Not Jacob, standing tall and perfect among the graduating seniors. I could feel it. A strange current buzzing under my skin, tightening my chest. I looked over my shoulder instinctively, scanning the crowd, but there was nothing, just hundreds of smiling families, clapping hands, camera flashes. And yet, deep in my bones, I knew something was coming. For a split second, I wondered if maybe I was just being ridiculous. After all, this was how it always was, right? I show up. I sit quietly. They pretend I do not exist. And the day moves on without me. But no. Not today. Something was about to shatter. The sound of laughter was everywhere. Parents were leaning into each other, whispering, sharing smiles, snapping photos like this was the single most important day of their lives. And maybe for them, it was. But for me, it was just another day of pretending I was fine with being invisible. I sat there, hands clenched so tight my knuckles went white, staring straight ahead, pretending not to hear my mother's voice. But it was impossible to block out. She was talking louder than anyone around us, as if the entire auditorium needed to know just how exceptional Jacob was. "Did you see the scholarship offers?" she asked no one in particular, but loud enough for 3 rows to hear. "It is unbelievable, really." They were practically begging him to choose. The coach from Stanford even called the house last night. My father chuckled, puffing his chest. "He is not just an athlete. He is a leader. A born winner." I sat right there. Right next to them. And not once did their eyes drift in my direction. Not once did they ask me anything, not even whether I was comfortable or could see the stage. I could have vanished into thin air, and I doubt either of them would have noticed until they needed someone to hold their coats. I swallowed hard, keeping my eyes glued to the front. Jacob was on the stage, perfect as always. His smile, that confident grin, the way he stood like he owned the world, it was everything my parents had always wanted. Everything they believed I could never be. A knot twisted in my stomach, but it was not sadness anymore. No. That had burned away years ago. This was something else. Something heavier. Something colder. As the principal stepped up to the microphone, the applause quieted down. Thank you all for being here today to celebrate the class of Lincoln High School. What a tremendous year this has been, blah, blah, blah. The words faded into the background. I had heard speeches like this before. Full of fake inspiration, empty promises about the future, and rehearsed lines meant to stir pride in families like mine. Families that smiled too big for sons they adored, and forgot daughters like me existed. My gaze drifted around the room. Moms wiping tears. Dads beaming with pride. Siblings hugging. I wondered, just for a moment, what it would feel like to be seen. Just once. For someone to look at me, not through me, and actually notice I was there. I had given up on that dream years ago. And yet, that strange feeling was back. Like the air itself was shifting. Like the walls were holding their breath. A sudden tension. A quiet that felt unnatural. I frowned, sitting up a little straighter. Something was wrong. Or maybe not wrong. But different. Very different. And then it happened. It started faint, almost dismissible. A low hum. A soft vibration in the floor beneath my shoes. Then, sirens. Not blaring, but close. Controlled. Purposeful. I turned my head sharply toward the entrance. Others were starting to notice too. Heads shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. Parents glanced at each other, confused. Through the tall auditorium windows, I caught the flash of blue and red lights blending with the deep black of sleek government vehicles. Not one. Not two. Several. All pulling up right outside the school. Doors slammed. Heavy boots hit the pavement in perfect rhythm. I could see the glint of polished shoes, the sharp lines of dark suits, the unmistakable presence of law enforcement escort teams. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd. What's going on? Is someone in trouble? Is this security? No one knew. No one except, maybe, me. Because in that moment, something in my gut twisted, not in fear. Not in confusion. But in certainty. The footsteps grew louder. Crisp. Measured. Purposeful. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't some random visit or a case of someone important attending the wrong event. No. This was precise. Intentional. People around me were sitting straighter now, craning their necks toward the entrance. My mother finally paused mid-sentence, her brows pulling together. My father glanced over his shoulder, confusion flickering in his eyes for the first time all afternoon. Then, the doors swung open. And there he was. The governor. Governor Charles Donovan. I blinked hard, convinced for a moment that my mind was playing tricks on me. But no. It was him. In the flesh. Every television broadcast, every news article, every political debate had burned his image into the minds of anyone who lived in this state. His signature silver hair, his commanding posture, that unmistakable air of power that made even the most arrogant men shrink 2 inches in his presence. And now, he was walking into Jacobs High School graduation. The room went silent. Not a polite silence. Not a respectful one. This was the kind of silence that sucks the air out of your lungs and leaves you holding your breath without realizing it. He was flanked by security agents in black suits, wires trailing from their earpieces, scanning every face, every corner of the auditorium. Behind them were more officers, keeping a perimeter, their eyes cold and sharp. But Governor Donovan? His gaze wasn't scanning the room like his security team. No. He knew exactly where he was going. Exactly who he was looking for. I sat frozen as his eyes swept across the front rows, past the principal, past the faculty, past the clusters of proud families. And then his eyes landed on me. Dead center. I felt the weight of it like a punch to the chest. His gaze wasn't casual. It wasn't some accident, some glance that happened to fall my way. It was deliberate. He looked directly at me. And then, as if the entire universe had frozen around that moment, he nodded. A small, subtle gesture. Barely there. But it was for me. Only me. And then, he smiled. Not the polished politician's smile you give to crowds. Not the rehearsed grin meant for cameras. This was real. Familiar. Almost proud. A murmur spread through the rows closest to me. Wait, is he? Did you see that? Who is she? What's happening? I felt my mother stiffen beside me. Her hand hovered midair, clutching her purse strap a little tighter. Her smile faltered, lips parting as confusion twisted her expression into something halfway between disbelief and discomfort. My father shifted in his seat, straightening his back, suddenly less sure of himself. His head snapped toward me like he was trying to solve an equation that had never made sense until now. For the first time in my life, their eyes were on me. Not because I spoke. Not because I asked. But because someone more powerful than anything they had ever imagined was looking right at me. And neither of them had a single clue why. I should have felt vindicated. But what I felt was the storm building. Something was coming. Something that was about to rip this perfect little illusion of a family apart. And there was no going back. The moment his eyes locked on mine, the ground beneath me might as well have vanished. It was not a casual glance or an accidental sweep of the room. No. Governor Charles Donovan looked straight into me like he had been searching for no one else in that auditorium. His gaze was sharp, commanding, but behind it there was something else, something unsettlingly familiar, as though he recognized me in a way that even my own parents never had. I felt the blood drain from my face, my pulse hammering in my ears. Around me, the air grew heavier, pressing against my skin like a suffocating wave. My mother stiffened, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse as her eyes darted between me and the man now approaching the stage. Her lips twitched, as if her mind were scrambling for some explanation that simply did not exist. My father sat up straighter, his jaw clenched, his fingers gripping his knee so tight his knuckles turned white. For once in his life, he looked unsettled. Confused. Like the world he had always understood had developed a crack right through the middle. I could hear the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. People leaning toward each other, eyes flickering, mouths half open with questions none of them could form into sentences yet. "Did you see that?" someone murmured behind me. "Why is the governor looking at her?" Another voice, lower but sharper, followed immediately. "Who is that girl?" But I was not a girl anymore. I had not been for a very long time. My whole body tensed, but I forced myself to stay perfectly still, as if moving would shatter the fragile reality unfolding in front of me. Governor Donovan continued his measured pace toward the stage, his security team maintaining their tight formation but never once interfering with the direct line he held to me. As he reached the steps, he paused, not to adjust his suit, not to look over the crowd, but to tilt his head the slightest bit in my direction. And then, he raised his hand. A subtle wave. Small. Precise. Intentional. For me. The gasps started then. Audible. Sharp. A woman 2 rows ahead turned completely around in her seat to stare at me. Someone to my left dropped their phone onto the floor with a clatter. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth, her fingers trembling against her lips. My father's head snapped toward me again, eyes narrowed, brows drawn so tight it looked like his entire face had collapsed inward. And Jacob, even from the stage, even from his perfect spot among the rows of graduating seniors, I saw his head jerk in my direction. His confident posture faltered, confusion flashing across his face like someone had just ripped away the script he had spent his entire life rehearsing. For a second, time felt unreal. Detached. as if everything around me was happening underwater. The governor ascended the stage, exchanged a brief handshake with the principal, who was visibly struggling to maintain his composure, and then walked directly to the podium. There was no announcement. No explanation. The murmurs turned into a dense, suffocating silence, like everyone was collectively holding their breath. I stared at him, my chest tight, my mind racing, trying to process the impossible reality in front of me. This could not be happening. And yet, it was. Governor Donovan adjusted the microphone with a smooth, practiced motion. Then, with a voice that was deep, steady, and absolutely unignorable, he said words that made the entire world tilt sideways. Words that were not meant for Jacob. Words that were not meant for my parents. They were meant for me. Only me. And as those words echoed through the stunned silence of the auditorium, I felt it, something seismic breaking free beneath the surface of everything I had ever known. The moment his voice echoed through the speakers, it was like the air was sucked out of the room. Governor Donovan did not hesitate. He did not clear his throat, did not stumble, did not give anyone time to understand or prepare for what was about to unfold. His presence filled every corner of that auditorium with a weight that was impossible to ignore. Before we proceed, he said, his gaze scanning the crowd but always drifting back to me, I would like to request a brief moment, for someone very special. The silence that followed was almost violent. No one moved. No one breathed. Every eye in the room shot toward him and then, inevitably, toward me. Because everyone had seen it. Everyone had felt it. The way he walked in. The way he looked directly at me. The way he spoke those words with an edge of reverence, not for the principal, not for the graduating class, but for me. I felt my throat tighten, my hands trembling against my legs. I could hear the sharp intake of my mother's breath beside me, followed by her whispering, "What is happening?" But there was no answer. Not from my father, who sat frozen, blinking like someone had just slapped him awake from a dream he did not realize he was having. Not from Jacob, whose eyes locked on me from the stage, his mouth slightly open, disbelief etched into every line of his perfect face. Around me, the murmurs began to bubble. A woman in front of me leaned toward her husband, her voice barely controlled. "Did you see that? He's talking about her," another voice from the back row cut in, sharper, almost frantic. "Who is she? Why is the governor looking at her?" And then another. "Is she someone important?" And another. "Is this a mistake?" It has to be, but it was not a mistake. It was anything but. I sat there, paralyzed, every muscle locked between fight and flight, but I knew neither was an option. Not now. Not anymore. Governor Donovan continued, his tone steady, almost personal. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, adjusting the microphone slightly, "there are moments when a community gathers to celebrate its future, but sometimes, the future is sitting quietly among you, unrecognized, unseen, until now." The wave of whispers turned into a rising tide of gasps and questions. Heads turned. Fingers pointed. People shifted in their seats, leaning, straining, trying to piece together something that made no sense but felt far too real to ignore. I could feel it crawling up my spine, that electric charge of attention I had never known, never wanted, and yet now, it was crashing over me like a tidal wave. My mother's hand gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Emily," she breathed, her voice cracking, What is this?" But I could not answer her. My mouth was dry. My heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear anything else. My father muttered something under his breath, a string of words too broken to make sense, his fingers twitching like he wanted to stand but could not trust his own legs. Jacob stood completely still on the stage, not blinking, not moving, staring at me like I had suddenly become a stranger in his world. The principal fumbled with his papers, whispering something to the governor that was immediately dismissed with a simple, raised hand. No. This was not a mistake. This was planned. This was intentional. And everyone was about to find out exactly why. The silence was suffocating. It pressed against my skin, heavy, crushing, as if the entire room was holding its breath waiting for something, anything, that could make sense of what was happening. But nothing could have prepared anyone, least of all me, for the next words that came out of Governor Donovan's mouth. He stood tall at the podium, adjusted the microphone with a calmness that felt both terrifying and surreal, then let his eyes drift back to me, steady, unwavering. And then, he spoke. "Admiral Carter, your presence here is an honor. The stage is yours." The sound was not just heard, it was felt. Like a crack splitting the earth beneath everyone's feet. The words echoed, then seemed to hang in the air, impossibly loud against the absolute stillness that followed. My body went completely numb. For a second, I was not even sure I had heard it correctly. But the faces around me told me I had. My mother's mouth fell open, her hand flying to her chest as if trying to stop her own heart from exploding. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. My father's face drained of color. His hands gripped the armrests of his seat so hard that his knuckles turned white, his entire frame stiff as stone. His eyes snapped to me, wild, disbelieving, filled with something I had never seen in him before, fear. The auditorium, it broke. It broke in the most spectacular way. There were no whispers now. No polite murmurs. Just gasps, stifled cries, chairs creaking as people shifted violently in their seats, heads whipping around, fingers pointing toward me. From the stage, Jacob stood frozen, eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, as if his brain had stopped processing language entirely. The golden boy. The star. The center of our family's universe. Looking at me like he was staring at someone he had never met before in his life. "Admiral," someone muttered behind me, their voice shaking. Did he say Admiral? Another voice answered, breathless. Is this some kind of joke? A prank? But no one was laughing. No one dared. My body felt like lead, as if gravity had doubled around me. I could not breathe. I could not think. And yet, somehow, my legs moved. I felt them push against the floor, trembling, uncertain, but moving all the same. I stood. And the world tilted. The movement triggered another ripple through the crowd, people gasping, some standing halfway as if trying to get a better look, others gripping their phones, fumbling to start recording, because this was no longer just a graduation. This was something else entirely. I could feel hundreds of eyes drilling into me, some wide with confusion, others narrowing with suspicion, but most filled with disbelief. And beneath it all, that same question rising like a wave, silent but deafening, who is she? My mother reached out as if to grab me, her fingers grazing my wrist. "Emily," she gasped, What is going on?" But I pulled away, not harshly, just enough to make it clear that whatever this was, it was bigger than her. Bigger than all of them. I turned my gaze toward the stage, locking eyes with Governor Donovan. He nodded, slow, steady, a signal not of command, but of confirmation. "Yes. This is real. This is you. This has always been you." And suddenly, I was no longer invisible. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my legs trembling beneath me, my heart pounding so violently I could hear it echo inside my skull. The weight of every stare pressed against my skin like needles. My throat was tight, my palms clammy, but I knew. I knew there was no turning back now. My body moved before my mind fully caught up. One step. Then another. Each one heavier than the last, like dragging chains made of every single moment I had ever been told I was nothing. Useless. Forgettable. Invisible. But not today. Not now. Not anymore. The floor seemed to tremble beneath my feet. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud against the auditorium tiles. People parted as I walked. They shifted in their seats, pulled their knees aside, leaned back, not because they wanted to make space, but because they did not know what else to do. It was automatic. Instinctive. As if their minds had not yet caught up with what their bodies were already responding to. My father tried to speak. I saw his mouth open, his hands lifting as if to stop me, but the words caught in his throat. Nothing came out. Not a sound. His lips trembled, his jaw clenched, but his voice, so often loud, so often cruel, was gone. My mother clung to his arm like she was drowning, her knuckles white, her face pale, her breath short and ragged. Her eyes darted wildly between me and the stage, disbelief twisting her features into something almost unrecognizable. "Emily," she whispered, barely able to get the word out. But it was too late. The damage was already done. The image of me standing, walking forward, toward the governor, toward the stage, was already burned into the minds of everyone there. I kept walking. I did not look left. I did not look right. I did not allow myself the smallest glance toward the audience filled with faces that had never once truly seen me until now. No. My eyes were locked on the stage. On the governor. On the place that had, for so many years, been reserved for others. For Jacob. For the stars. For the golden children. Never for me. Every step felt like defiance. Every movement was a rejection of every word, every sigh, every dismissive glance I had ever endured. I could feel the air shift around me, growing heavier, denser, tighter, as the whispers turned into open gasps, as the tension stretched tighter and tighter, ready to snap. Even Jacob, standing up there among his classmates, was no longer smiling. No longer basking in the endless applause he had always assumed belonged to him. His eyes were wide, his lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. He watched me like I was a stranger. Like I had become something he could not understand. Something terrifying. Something more. As I reached the steps leading up to the stage, a security officer moved aside, giving me a respectful nod, not as a formality, but as recognition. Genuine. Sincere. Another snapped to attention, his posture shifting as if I outranked him, which, I realized, I did. The realization sent a jolt through me. It was real. This was real. I placed my foot on the first step, then the second. My hands were steady now. The shaking was gone, replaced by something deeper. Something solid. The echo of my shoes against the wood rang louder than anything else in the room. The murmurs stopped. The audience was silent again. Silent in a way I had never experienced in my entire life. Silent because, for the first time, I was not background noise. I was not invisible. I was the storm walking into the room. As my feet hit the stage, a flood of memories surged through me like a tidal wave. Every step carried the weight of years spent being ignored, diminished, dismissed. Years of hearing the same cruel words over and over like a curse etched deep into my bones. You are just average. You will never amount to anything. You are nothing like Jacob. But now, here I was. Standing on the stage. Standing in front of the governor. Standing in front of my family. In front of an entire town that never had the slightest idea who I really was. The governor's gaze didn't waver. It held steady, respectful, knowing, proud. A type of pride I had never seen reflected in my parents' eyes. Never once. Never even close. And in that single moment, I realized a truth that felt like both a dagger and a liberation no one here knew. None of them. Not my parents. Not Jacob. Not the teachers who had overlooked me as easily as my own family did. Not a single person in this auditorium had the faintest clue of the life I had built when no one was watching. They had no idea that at 17, while Jacob basked in the spotlight, chasing trophies, popularity, and endless praise, I disappeared. But not because I was weak. Not because I was running away. I disappeared because I was building something else. Something bigger. Something they never imagined was even possible for someone like me. On a random morning, while my mother flipped pancakes for Jacob, while my father sat with his nose buried in the newspaper, pretending I was not even breathing in the same house, I walked into a Navy recruitment office and signed my name. No one noticed I was gone that day. No one asked where I had been. No one cared. And so it began. Endless training. Days that started long before sunrise and ended deep into the night. While Jacob collected medals for school competitions, I was learning how to survive conditions that would break the very people sitting in that audience. I learned how to push past hunger, past exhaustion, past fear. until none of those things had power over me anymore. With each mission, I grew sharper, stronger, smarter. I rose faster than anyone expected, younger than anyone thought possible. Until one day, I became what no one in this auditorium or anyone in the world around me ever imagined I could be. An admiral. One of the youngest women in modern U.S. Navy history to ever reach that rank. Classified missions. High-stakes operations. International negotiations. I commanded units that operated in the shadows, protecting lives that would never know my name and never needed to. While my family treated me like background noise, I was becoming indispensable to an entire country. And now, that world, the one I built in silence, in shadows, with no help and no applause, was about to collide, violently and irrevocably, with this stage, this school, and this sea of faces that never once bothered to truly see me. The governor gave me a slight nod, a signal more powerful than any speech. And I understood, without a single word needing to be spoken, it was time. I took a deep breath as I stepped fully into the center of the stage. The weight of hundreds of eyes burned against my skin, some stunned, some confused, some already filling with regret. My fingers brushed against the microphone, steady now, no tremor left in them. I had faced storms. I had walked through war zones. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever felt as heavy as this moment. I scanned the crowd, not looking for strangers. I was looking for them. For my mother. For my father. For Jacob. And when I found them, frozen, pale, speechless, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not revenge. No. It was something colder. Something cleaner. It was truth. I adjusted the microphone, letting the silence stretch until the tension became unbearable. And then I spoke. Good afternoon. My voice came out calm. Controlled. Strong. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Emily Carter. The wave of whispering that surged beneath my words was immediate, frantic. People glancing at one another, leaning into shoulders, jaws hanging open. Phones were already raised, recording, streaming, capturing something that none of them would ever forget. I let my gaze drift back to the first row, to the people who had spent their entire lives pretending I was invisible. Some of you might know me as Jacob's sister, I continued, keeping my voice steady, even. That was my title for a very long time. The quiet one. The average one. The background. I paused, breathing in slowly, letting the silence bite. But titles are funny things, because sometimes they are dead wrong. Gasps. Someone in the back muttered, "No way," another whispered, "Is this real?" I ignored them all. My eyes never left the first row. While I spent years sitting quietly, while I listened to every backhanded comment, every dismissal, every reminder that I was never going to be enough. I was building something. I was becoming someone. And while you celebrated achievements you thought mattered, I was earning honors you could not even comprehend. My mother's hands were covering her mouth, her shoulders trembling. My father sat stiff as stone, his face blank but his fingers twitching like he did not know whether to stand up or collapse into the floor. Jacob. Jacob's face was drained of color, his lips slightly parted, staring at me like I was someone who had never existed until this very second. I joined the U.S. Navy at 17, I said, my voice sharp now, each word hitting like a hammer. I trained harder, longer, and more brutally than anything anyone here has ever imagined. I rose through the ranks. I led missions classified at the highest levels of national security. I have commanded operations that have saved lives, changed the outcomes of conflicts, and protected this country while most people were asleep in their beds. The room was dead silent. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Not even a breath. And today, I continued, I stand before you as an admiral of the United States Navy. One of the youngest to hold this rank in modern history. Someone in the back gasped so loud it echoed. A teacher dropped their clipboard. A student's phone clattered to the floor. My voice did not shake. Not even once. I say this not for applause, not for recognition, but because sometimes the world needs to be reminded that the people you dismiss, the people you overlook, are often the ones carrying more weight than you could ever bear. I turned my gaze back to my family. And sometimes, the invisible ones are anything but. The silence that followed was suffocating. Not because it was empty, but because it was too full. Full of shattered illusions. Full of disbelief. Full of a reality that no one in this room was prepared to face. I could feel it, thick, heavy, wrapping around every breath anyone tried to take. I scanned the sea of stunned faces, watching as their brains struggled to reconcile everything they thought they knew with the truth now standing in front of them. I was no longer the background. No longer the shadow. No longer the invisible one. I shifted my stance slightly, straightening my shoulders as I let the next words roll off my tongue, precise and sharp as blades. Throughout my career, I have led missions in territories you will never find on a map. I have commanded teams in operations that never made the news. I have negotiated with foreign governments, intercepted threats that could have cost thousands of lives, and stood in rooms where a single mistake could have changed the course of history. I paused, letting the weight of that settle into their bones. The governor, standing just to my right, nodded with a solemn, steady pride, confirming every word without needing to say a single thing. The medals I have received, I continued, are not displayed in a living room. They are locked behind vaults. The honors I carry, they are not the kind you post about online. They are the kind that come with silence, secrecy, and sacrifice. My voice grew sharper, not louder, just heavier, more deliberate. I have seen men fall. I have carried burdens most people will never understand. And through it all, I carried another weight. A heavier one. The weight of knowing that my own family didn't see me. That in this very town, I was just Jacob's sister. The quiet one. The forgettable one. I turned my gaze slowly, letting it land squarely on Jacob. His face was hollow now, his hands gripping the edges of his graduation gown like he needed something, anything, to ground him. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Not a single sound. The boy who had been the center of every conversation. Every celebration. Every ounce of pride this family had ever known now stood as small as I had once felt. I have stood in briefing rooms with the Secretary of Defense. I have sat at war tables with generals who command entire fleets. I have delivered orders that determined whether operations lived or died. And yet, for years, I came home and was asked why I wasn't more like Jacob. The words were daggers. Not screamed. Not spat. Just spoken. Simply. Truthfully. And that, somehow, made them cut even deeper. The crowd was no longer breathing. It felt like the entire auditorium had frozen in time. I could see people's hands trembling. Teachers who had ignored me staring with their mouths half open. Students who never learned my name now holding their phones like relics of a history they could barely process. And then, it happened. The governor took a single step forward, placing his hand lightly on my shoulder. He turned his gaze to the crowd, his voice steady but firm. Everything you've heard here today is true. Admiral Carter's service, her honors, her sacrifices, they are real. She is real. And her presence here is not just an honor for me. It is an honor for every single person in this room. A wave of gasps broke across the room like a tidal surge. I could hear it, dozens of phones pinging live notifications as people began streaming, posting, texting furiously. The truth was no longer confined to this room. It was exploding beyond these walls. And no one, not Jacob, not my mother, not my father, not this town, would ever be able to bury it again. For a moment, there was stillness. Not the kind that comes with peace, but the heavy, suffocating kind that arrives when reality hits so hard it leaves everyone breathless. Then, the flood broke. It started as a single pair of hands clapping. Slow. Hesitant. Unsure. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the sound built, crashing against the walls of the auditorium like a storm. Applause. Not polite. Not obligatory. It was raw. Disbelieving. A mixture of shock, awe, and something else, something deeper. Reverence. I stood there, frozen, as wave after wave of clapping echoed, people rising from their seats one by one, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. Hundreds of people. Parents. Teachers. Students. Strangers who had never looked at me twice before. They were standing for me. Their hands beating together in a rhythm that felt like thunder under my skin. And then came the phones. The flashes. The live streams. The notifications. I could see it, rows of screens lifted high, faces staring, not just with their eyes but through their cameras, broadcasting this moment to the world. This wasn't just happening here anymore. This was everywhere. In the middle of all of it, my family was crumbling. My mother stood with one hand pressed against her chest, her face twisted in something between shame, disbelief, and grief. Tears streamed down her face, whether from regret or humiliation, I couldn't tell. She kept shaking her head, as if doing so could rewind time, as if she could somehow erase every moment she had dismissed me. Her mouth opened and closed, her lips trembling, but no words came out. Nothing that could fix this. Nothing that could explain this away. My father, he sat. He didn't stand. Didn't clap. Didn't even look up. His elbows were on his knees, his hands laced behind his head, fingers digging into his scalp like he was trying to physically hold his world together before it split entirely. His eyes were locked on the floor, dark, distant, hollow. The man who had always been the loudest voice in the room was now utterly, completely silent. And Jacob. Jacob looked like a man watching the ground disappear beneath his feet. His hands were gripping the sides of his gown so tightly the fabric trembled. His face had lost all color, his lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes glossy, not with pride, but with the terrible, dawning realization that everything he believed, everything he had been told, everything that had ever placed him on a pedestal above me, was a lie. His gaze met mine. And for the first time in his life, he saw me. Not as the shadow behind him. Not as the quiet sister who faded into the background. But as something bigger. As someone he had never known. Someone he was never prepared to meet. Around us, the crowd surged closer, a tide of voices rising as people reached for me, hands outstretched to shake mine, phones pushed forward for selfies, voices calling my name like I was some mythical figure that had stepped out of a story and into their reality. I heard them. Thank you for your service. You are incredible. I had no idea, ma'am, it's an honor. The surrealness of it pressed in tight, but I stood my ground. Not out of pride. Not out of arrogance. But because this was mine. This moment. This truth. After years of silence. After years of being unseen. This was mine. I glanced back at my family one last time, at my mother trembling, at my father shattered, at Jacob drowning in the wreckage of his own certainty, and in that instant, I understood something I never had before. I was never the one who was small. It was never me. It had always been them. As I stepped down from the stage, it felt like the ground itself had shifted beneath me. People pressed closer, hands reaching out, voices tumbling over one another, desperate to speak, to touch, to capture even a fragment of the moment. Strangers, people who had walked past me 1,000 times without a second glance, now stared at me with wide eyes, awestruck smiles, and trembling hands holding their phones, snapping photos like they were afraid I might disappear if they blinked. Admiral, thank you for everything. You are an inspiration. I had no idea someone like you was from here. Their words came in waves, some sincere, some frantic, some simply stunned beyond measure. They didn't know what else to do. None of them did. Because everything they thought they knew had just been rewritten in real time, right before their eyes. As the crowd parted to let me through, my gaze inevitably found them, my family. My mother was standing now, her hands shaking, her face streaked with tears she probably didn't even understand. She took a half step toward me, her lips trembling, trying to form words. Emily. We didn't. Her voice cracked and broke, dissolving into something that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a gasp, just raw, breathless confusion. I paused. For a brief second, I simply looked at her. At this woman who had spent years seeing straight through me. And now she saw me. She truly saw me. But it was too late. Far, far too late. She reached out, her hand hovering, unsure whether to grab my arm, to hold me, or maybe just to beg me to erase the last 20 minutes of reality. "Emily, please," the words were barely there. I didn't pull away. I didn't move closer either. I simply nodded once. Not with forgiveness. Not with anger. Just acknowledgement. This was what reality felt like when it finally crashed down. My father, he didn't move. He didn't even lift his head. He sat there, shoulders hunched forward, his hands clenched into fists, pressed tight against his mouth. His eyes were fixed on the floor like he could bore a hole into it and fall through, away from the suffocating weight of what had just happened. The man who had once filled every room with his voice, was now a hollow shell, broken by a truth he was never strong enough to face. And Jacob. Jacob was still on the stage, standing frozen as the ceremony he thought was his fell completely apart. His hands were limp at his sides now, his face pale, his eyes glassy, empty. He watched me like someone watching a wildfire devour everything they ever loved, everything they ever believed was safe, was real, was theirs. I walked past them. Not because I wanted to hurt them. Not because I wanted revenge. But because, for the first time in my entire life, I could. Because I no longer needed anything from them, not their approval, not their pride, not even their recognition. I had outgrown the smallness they tried to trap me in. I had become something far beyond what their narrow minds could ever contain. People continued flooding around me, voices echoing, cameras flashing. I shook hands. I smiled. I posed for pictures. But none of it was for validation. None of it was for them. It was for me. For the girl they had tried to erase. For the woman they had never seen coming. And as I reached the doors at the back of the auditorium, the same ones I had walked through countless times as a shadow, a figure stepped forward, the governor himself. His security detail flanked him, but he was already extending his hand to me, smiling. A real smile. One filled with pride. "Admiral Carter," he said, his voice warm, steady, "shall we?" I glanced once more over my shoulder. At the audience still on their feet. At my family, still drowning in the wreckage of their own blindness. And without a word, I stepped forward, into the life that was always meant to be mine. As I walked through the doors of the auditorium, flanked by the governor and his security detail, the sound behind me was deafening. Applause. Standing ovations. Voices calling my name. Cameras flashing. But it all felt distant now, like the final echo of a chapter one had just closed forever. I did not look back again. I did not need to. Because I knew. I knew exactly what I had left behind. And more importantly, I knew who I had become. Outside, a line of black government vehicles stood ready, their polished frames gleaming under the afternoon sun. Officers snapped to attention as I approached, offering crisp, sharp salutes that I returned instinctively, my hands steady, my shoulders squared, my head held high. The governor opened the car door for me himself, not out of ceremony, not for the cameras, but out of genuine respect. Real, tangible respect, the kind I had spent a lifetime fighting for, though never from the people I thought I would. As I slid into the car, the door closed behind me with a finality that felt like the slam of a gate, locking the past firmly where it belonged. Through the tinted window, I could still see the crowd inside. Still standing. Still clapping. Still processing the truth they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Jacob would not be the story they told about this day. His name would not be the one etched into memory. No. This day belonged to me. To Emily Carter. To the girl who grew up invisible. To the woman who rose higher than anyone in that town ever dreamed possible. To the admiral who had walked silently among them for years, unseen, unacknowledged, until today. The car pulled away, the crowd slowly fading into the distance behind us. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. A deep, full breath, the kind that fills every part of your body when you finally stop carrying the weight of other people's expectations. I felt lighter than I ever had in my entire life. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. The governor glanced at me, offering a smile. "You handled that with more grace and strength than most men I have ever met in my career," he said quietly. "You've made an entire state proud today, Admiral." I nodded, offering a small, knowing smile of my own. "Thank you, sir." But today was not for them. It was for her. He tilted his head, curious. "For who?" I turned my gaze toward the horizon, watching as the town slowly disappeared behind us. For the girl they never saw. The girl they never believed in. The girl they tried to make small. She deserved this. Silence filled the space between us. Not awkward. Not empty. Just full. Full of everything that needed no words. As the convoy moved forward, I leaned back, letting the rhythm of the road steady my pulse. Somewhere far behind, in a crumbling auditorium filled with faces that would never forget what they had witnessed, the story of the invisible girl had come to an end. But my story, the real story, was only just beginning. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that the echo of this day would never die. Not in that town. Not in that state. Not in this lifetime. It would echo forever.